Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 series. Today we will start playing the Soviet Union, and this has been democratically decided, because I literally asked you, and the vast majority of you said, yes, I would like to see the Soviet Union. Now, I don't know if you had any illusions that this was going to be an old history, because no, this isn't going to be one. We are going to play with Stalin. So, before we get into the whole thing, let's have a very brief look at the brief history that is displayed here in the nice selection screen. And it says, when the dust settled after the Russian Civil War, the USSR had emerged as the undisputed ruler over most of what once constituted the Russian Empire. Rapid industrialization and collectivization followed, often at a great cost in human lives. The Soviet Union is now faced with the threat of a resurgent Germany to the west and a belligerent Japan in the east. Of course, there are also internal threats within the ranks of the Communist Party to contend with. This is putting it mildly. So let's take a step back very quickly before we get going, shall we? I'm actually going to pick up some notes here, which I don't usually do. Usually all my stuff is just coming straight from brain to tongue. But I have some key points here I need to include. So, in the middle of the 19th century, there was a guy who looked like this. And you can see that he was sort of a philosopher because he had a very long beard and he was rather poor. And he observed that the world around him, basically was made out of two kinds of people. There was the kind of people who does all the work, and there was the kind of people who are running the show. And generally the people who were running the show would own most of the things, and the people who did all the work would not. And he figured that was unfair, for understandable reasons. So as philosophy goes, that just kind of really existed until this guy came around. And he read all this philosophy, which is why it's always dangerous to write these sort of ideas down, and figured, yep, that's great, I'm a big fan. Now, of course, being a fan of something and actually doing something about it are two completely different things, because at the time, most of the area which we're going to be playing as the Soviet Union was the Russian Empire. So a very traditional separation of lots of people who do things like hard work, farming, dying on the field, and lots of people who don't, because they own all the things and run the show. And then in 1917, after lots of dying had happened, and the people who were doing the hard work got somewhat fed up. And wisely, the emperor decided, nope, I'm out of here, and left. Which left still a lot of people who were running the show to run the show, just scratch one figurehead. But then this guy that we talked about earlier, who was the big fan of the philosophy, came around again and said, you know what? This is an opportunity. We can try this in practice. So, talking about revolutions. Revolutions always have two sides. Well, they practically have three sides, but there's one side who does the revolution, there's one side who is being revolted, and there's the vast majority of people who would really just love to get on with their lives and everything to be a little bit better afterwards, but couldn't actually care too much who was running the show. So, the group who is doing the revolutionizing are the people who are most unhappy. The group who is being revolutionized are the people who are going to be very unhappy afterwards, because these used to be the people running the show and they are no longer doing so, which also tends to often come with a threat to material wealth and or personal health. So, as such, you need somebody to be in charge afterwards, because getting the idea of having a country run by peasants and workers is great. But peasants and workers are not very good at running countries for two reasons. First of all, they have very little experience in running a country because they are specialized in farming and labor. And second of all, they are somewhat busy farming and laboring, and as such don't actually have time for this nonsense. So there needs to be someone to do it for them, which is our big fan here. and who decided, yes, this is a great opportunity, let us create a country where everybody is equal. And then there's not going to be anybody who is very rich and running the show, and a lot of people who are poor and doing the working and dying for it. Now, there's this ever so slight problem, because after that, after the revolution, you actually have the group I described earlier, the group who used to run the show, who's now very unhappy because they no longer are. So you have to somehow deal with these people. And Lenin here thought, well, he went back to the time-honored tradition of shooting them if they disagreed, which, sort of works. But he also had another problem, and that was that the economy was broken because, well, a lot of people had done the dying instead of the working, and if you shoot too many people, sometimes they did fulfill some purpose other than just lazing around all day. So the economy was broken, which meant that Lenin, who was trying to create a communist utopia based on the philosophy that he was reading about, was now faced with the problem of economic nature, which means he introduced capitalism, which then brought its own set of problems, because suddenly you had rich people again, because that tends to happen under capitalism, which sort of defeated the whole purpose of the thing. Now, he thought this was going to be temporary, but then proceeded to die, which then brought this guy, who we are going to be playing with in this series, and he looked at it, and he had several problems. First of all, he had a country that was having capitalism, and if you're trying to be a communist country, that is kind of defeating the purpose. He also had the problem that he now had still grumpy people who used to run the show and who no longer did run the show, because some of them were still around and they did want to run the show again. There were also people who had recently gotten rich and now would also like to run the show, and very much disagreed with the idea of everybody being equal again and the whole worker dictatorship and whatnot. Also, he was severely lacking in industry compared. So if we looked at his neighbors, who all might get, as history goes, the European neighbors tend to invade the area. So he figured, you know what, we're gonna need ourselves some industry. So he decided, first of all, disown all the rich people, the recent rich people. That made them very unhappy. A lot of them owned a lot of land. He wanted to industrialize, which brings in a new problem, because you need people to work in your factories. But if everybody is working on a farm, you don't really have somebody. So his solution to that was economy of scale. So if a lot of small farms don't really work very well in terms of productivity per farmer, you need fewer bigger farms with mechanization and tractors and machines, to be more efficient. And then you have the farmers, the former farmers, free to move to the cities and work in the factories. And you produce enough food. So that idea was, that's what he tried. It didn't work out very well. And a lot of people starved to death, because the people who used to own the farms were very grumpy about this, because they were now on the rich side of people who got discontinued. And they tended to either hide away the food or just get rid of it, just out of spite. They literally shot their own cattle rather than giving it to the poor. Also, the whole idea of, yes, let's industrialize farming is all well and good, provided you actually have machines to industrialize your farming with. And since the problem was that he didn't have enough workers to produce the machines, well, he didn't really have them. So at the beginning, the whole food situation was very bad and lots of people died. Also, you still had the grumpy people around from before, some of them, and new grumpy people. So Stalin obviously went and picked up that time-honored tradition of just shooting them. And that's pretty much the point that we're coming in and starting our... So this was the long version of the we got a couple of problems situation. So let us begin. Yes, we are that really, really big red bit here. And I am actually going to... I'm not playing on Iron Man mode. That's not because I'm trying to cheat. That is literally because I don't trust the screen recorders to always pick things up. I've had the occasional crashes in screen recorders before. and then I can't just load a previous save and do it all over again, but have to say, oops, sorry, I actually lost 2 hours of footage here, and yeah, too bad. So that's why I'm doing this. I am, however, going to set custom game rules. So I am going to make Germany better. and I'm doing this blind. I have never tested this. So I have a two A4 pages strategy paper of what I'm gonna do, but this is all pre-Germany, so this might get interesting. This obviously makes everything better with the Germans. It makes the Germans a lot more difficult to play against. So, but we're doing that. So that's that. We've got improved Germany. Other than that, it's just standard historical. So let us begin. In this episode today, I am just going to give you a very brief overview of the challenges that we'll be facing, because I am also, and this is another thing that I was asking you all, I am also going to keep the episode somewhat shorter. You're not going to get less content. You're going to get the same amount of content as previously. It's just that I'm going to cut it down into preferably sub 30-minute kind of partial episodes, and then just publish them more frequently, so in smaller bites, such that they're not these massive 1 hour, 90-minute episodes. Okay, so a very brief, and I think what we're going to be looking at today is a very brief look at the focus tree. So for those of you who are familiar with Hearts of Iron 4, yes, that is the focus tree. This is with the latest DLC. I have upgraded to By Blood Alone. I'm actually jumping from No Step Back here now to jump to By Blood Alone, and also then got in all the just game upgrades, because I had pinned the game engine for the last series. So let's have a very brief look at this focus tree, because this is extremely daunting. If you see this as a first, it's like, what the world am I going to do? And the thing with the Soviet Union is that if you don't do it right, especially with Stalin, if you don't do it right, you'll be in trouble. So what do we actually have here? Let's have a quick look. So on the left side, the first tree here, this is the economic tree. There's a bunch of, this is the industrialization tree that we'll be dealing with. We have an Air Force tree. There's this one. We have a naval tree, which we're probably going to be mostly ignoring because we've got other problems. We have a research tree. That's kind of this bit here. We have a fortification tree, which gives us a lot of defensive setup, and we have an army tree, which sorts out some of the army problems. We also have the political tree, which deals with Stalin and with all the shenanigans that are going on that I mentioned in the intro. All this bit here, we're pretty much going to ignore, because this is the alternate history thing if you're going with Trotsky, or if you're going with what's his name? Forgot. But the fascist opposition, pretty much. And this one is a propaganda tree, which is very interesting. And then we have the political, or the foreign politics tree. So we've got the whole Comintern and dealing with other countries, and how we become, well, because we're kind of the inventor and leader of Marxist-Leninist implementation. So we sort of want to be the communist in the world, and that's the sort of the tree that deals with those things. This tree, I honestly actually have no idea what this is all about. I think this is the monarchist tree. Yes. So this is the monarchist tree. If you get back to the monarchy, then there's a whole flurry of shenanigans down here that you can deal with. So that we're going to ignore. This is politics. That's useful. All these bits we don't care about. This here, that's the internal. That's the Stalin tree, to deal with his personal shenanigans, as well as the actual problems inside the Communist Party. That's the army tree, to fix our army problems. That's the research and defense. This is the naval tree that we're going to ignore. This is the air tree, and this is the industry tree. All right, because we are starting with a lot of problems. Stalin wasn't joking when he said, yeah, we're probably about 50 to 100 years behind everybody else in Europe. We are home of the revolution, which is great, so we're not easily going to be not communist. Stalin is somewhat concerned about Trotsky, who is in Mexico at this point, and is suspecting that Trotsky is plotting his demise, which, given that there is an actual tree to get Trotsky into power over here, is potentially not completely unwarranted. That costs us political power and 20% stability. We have a politicized military, which means that our military is operating not so much on merit, but more on political allegiance, which has some relatively hefty penalties on doctrine cost. Because, you don't get the smartest people to decide how you're going to fight. You get those who are aligning themselves with the party best. We also have the 5-year plan going, because, well, that's the idea. If you want to force an complete economic overhaul and drag the country kicking and screaming out of primary production agricultural society into heavy industry, you're gonna have a plan. Unfortunately, if you plan every single detail, the reality tends not to work accordingly. So this costs us an extra 5% consumer good factories, which means these are factories we can't use for anything. And fortunately, it does, however, give us a civilian factory construction speed. The Soviet Air Force is, how am I going to put this? It's terrible. So we have a 75% air accident chance increase. So we don't actually have to be too afraid of let's say, the Germans or anybody else, because our pilots are struggling to actually keep our planes in the air as they are, especially if it's night or if it rains. So that's not great. We also have the Red Army, which is in desperate need of modernization. So we get less army experience. They have less organization. They lose a lot of experienced soldiers very easily. But it's relatively easy to conscript more people into it. We are starting with volunteers, and we're starting with export focus and civilian economy. And we're starting with Yagoda, who is the head of the NKVD, which is sort of the secret police of the whole thing, which is having, right now, not having an awful lot of negative effects, but that'll come. That'll come pretty soon. We have a vast, long list of potential people. Half of them are in jail. And like I said, Stalin likes to solve the problem of people who disagree with him by having them shot. So that's something. We don't have an awful lot of industry. We've got 45 civilian factories, and we have 32 military factories, which isn't bad to begin with, but we are a very large country. And we are going to need more industry if we are going to be able to stand up against these folks over here, especially now that they are a lot scarier than they used to be. So scary guys over here. We have to build up our industry. So that's going to be kind of the theme for the time being. We've got a fair amount of divisions, and if we have a very quick look through our research tree. We've got a couple of infantry researchers, pretty standard stuff. We do have actually a couple of supports. We've got trucks already sorted. We do have relatively advanced light tanks, so that's something we can look at later. We've got the 1936 light tanks already researched, as well as the 1936 engines. However, we haven't researched any armor techs. Artillery, we do have AA and basic artillery unlocked. We do have 1936 destroyers and cruisers, as well as submarines. So there's definitely actually some things here, but we're mostly going to ignore the Navy because, well, we've got land problems. We do have the light batteries, the 1936 light batteries researched, and in the air. Now, this is, if you're not familiar with By Blood Alone, this is very, very different. So we'll be going through the plane designer, and I've spent quite some hours trying to figure out how things work. But effectively, we've got small airframes, 1936 airframes. So this can be built into fighters and CAS and naval bombers. We've got the 1936 medium airframes. This can be built into heavy fighters or into TAC bombers, tactical bombers. We don't have the 1936 large airframes for strategic bombing. But we've got a fair amount of actual air techs researched, like the cannons and the improved engines. So we're relatively up to date with our aircraft research at this point, and obviously there's no research happening over here, other than the synthetic oil is already done, which is kind of nice because we're going to need some rubber at some point. So that is the starting situation when it comes to the Soviet Union. And next episode, or next part, in the second part, we will go through this a lot more detail, take stock of our armed forces, and I'll explain a bit more how the strategy is going to work going forward. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.